A loaded .45 caliber handgun was pressed against her face, and she did not flinch. She did not scream. She did not beg. While an entire restaurant full of people were on the floor crying for their lives, this 24-year-old waitress calmly pushed the armed robber aside with her hip and went back to making a cup of espresso. The security footage went viral overnight. 4 million views. The internet called her the Ice Queen. But here is what no one knew. That waitress was not who she claimed to be. She was hiding a deadly secret, one that connected her to a powerful crime family in Naples, a fake death, and $50 million locked inside a vault in Zurich. And when the most dangerous man in Chicago became obsessed with uncovering her true identity, it did not just change her life. It started a war between two criminal empires. But the most shocking part? The ending. Because what she did with that $50 million is something you will never see coming. Stay with me. This story will keep you on the edge of your seat until the very last word. It was November 14th, 2019. A soaking wet Tuesday in Chicago that was supposed to be completely forgettable. Inside a high-end restaurant, 3 armed men smashed through the door, certain they would find easy cash and people paralyzed by fear. They found the money and they found the terror. But they also found one exception. Security camera footage that surfaced online days later revealed a waitress standing mere inches from a loaded .45 caliber handgun, calmly pouring an espresso without a single tremor. The world would come to call her the Ice Queen. But for Lorenzo Moretti, the most feared man in the city who sat watching from a back booth, she was not a hero. She was an enigma. And he understood that such profound calm is never born from bravery. It is forged in a past filled with darkness and blood. This is the narrative of how one waitress's composure ignited a war. The event unfolded at the Gilded Fork, an upscale Italian fusion establishment located on the periphery of Chicago's River North District. It was the type of place where powerful politicians would meet with union bosses, and the lights were always kept low enough to hide a troubled conscience. Harper Caroline, a woman of 24 years, was designed to be invisible. That was her purpose. She was more than just a waitress. She was a specialist in disappearing into the scenery. Her plain brown hair was always pulled into a tight, severe bun. She never wore cosmetics, and she consistently kept her eyes downcast. To the restaurant's patrons, she was merely a set of hands that delivered their risotto and kept their wine glasses full. To her manager, she was the model employee who never called in sick and willingly accepted her wages in cash, no questions asked. But on this specific night, the delicate balance of the restaurant's world was about to be shattered. Seated in the corner booth, at table 14, the single location with a clear line of sight to both exits, was Lorenzo Moretti. At 32 years old, Moretti was the acting head of the Moretti crime family, having ascended to the position following his father's public execution 2 years earlier. He was a man whispered to never sleep, and he was flawlessly dressed in a bespoke charcoal suit. He was sipping sparkling water, his gaze sweeping across the room with the sharp focus of a bird of prey. He was flanked by 2 bodyguards who appeared as if they were sculpted from solid granite. Lorenzo had no interest in the food. He was there to meet a courier, and his nerves were stretched thin. At 8:14 in the evening, the front door did not just open, it exploded inward. This was not a precise, tactical entry. It was an act of pure, blunt force. 3 men wearing ski masks charged in, brandishing sawed-off shotguns and pistols. The explosive sound of splintering glass instantly killed the quiet murmur of conversation. "Everybody get down on the floor now! Phones on the table!" the leader shouted. His voice was strained, cracking with the sharp, uncontrolled spike of amateur adrenaline. The room descended into pure panic. A woman seated near the window let out a piercing scream. A businessman threw himself under his table, sending a bottle of expensive red wine crashing to the floor, where it spread like a pool of fresh blood across the polished wood. Harper was positioned at the espresso machine just behind the mahogany bar. She had just secured the portafilter into the machine. The sound of the violent entry did not make her so much as flinch. She did not drop the delicate cup. She did not cry out. The man leading the robbers, an agitated figure in a worn-out hoodie, stalked toward the cash register, waving his weapon erratically. "Open it! Open the register!" he screamed at the manager. A heavy-set man by the name of Mr. Henderson was on the floor, struggling to breathe. When Henderson proved incapable of standing, the gunman shifted his attention to Harper. He jumped over the counter, driving the barrel of his pistol hard into her cheek. The steel was cold, damp from the storm raging outside. "You open this register, or I swear I will paint this wall with your brains." This was the precise moment that would later confound criminal analysts and amateur detectives on the internet. Harper did not let out a gasp of fear. She did not plead for her life. Instead, she deliberately turned her head, allowing the gun barrel to drag across her skin, and looked the gunman directly in his eyes. If one had been able to measure it, her heart rate would have barely accelerated. "The key is located under the counter, on the left side," she stated. Her voice was perfectly even, completely without emotion. It was not the voice of someone about to be murdered. It was the voice of a disinterested customer service agent detailing the store's return policy. "If you fire that weapon, the sound will activate the silent alarm because of the decibel sensors. If you just grab the money, you will have exactly 90 seconds before the patrol car stationed on 4th Avenue gets the alert about the broken glass." The gunman froze in place. The sheer specificity of her statement scrambled his violent thoughts. "What?" he managed to breathe out. "You are wasting your time," Harper said. She turned her back on the gunman and faced the espresso machine. With a steady hand, she pressed the button, and the machine whirred to life, indifferent to the armed robbery unfolding. She needed the milk pitcher. "Move," she said, her voice devoid of fear. She pushed the robber aside with her hip, a shocking act of defiance that made him stumble. From a dark corner, Lorenzo Moretti watched it all. His hand was already inside his jacket, securely gripping a silenced pistol. He was ready to end the threat, but something made him wait. He'd seen professional killers shake before a job and soldiers say their prayers before a battle. Never had he witnessed a waitress treat a life-or-death situation like a small annoyance. She is not praying for her life, Lorenzo realized. His eyes narrowed in understanding. She is running a clock on them. The robbers were completely thrown off by her strange calm and the complete absence of fear. They fumbled, grabbed the money from the register, and snatched phones from the tables closest to the door. They were gone in exactly 80 seconds, just as the first distant siren began to cry. The moment the door swung closed, the spell broke, and the restaurant plunged into pandemonium. Patrons began sobbing, frantically dialing 911 and clinging to their families. But Harper Caroline simply picked up the perfectly made espresso. She walked from behind the counter, crossed the chaotic room, and set it down gently on table 14. "Your double espresso, sir," she said to Lorenzo. "It is on the house. I apologize for the disruption." Lorenzo stared at the steaming cup for a long moment before lifting his gaze to her face. Her eyes were deep, empty, and completely devoid of any fear. "Who are you?" Lorenzo asked, his voice low and laced with danger. "Just a waitress," she answered, already turning to leave. "A waitress who knows the precise response time of the 4th Avenue Patrol Unit." Harper paused mid-stride. She did not turn around. "I watch a lot of police dramas." Lorenzo watched her disappear into the kitchen. He raised the cup and took a small sip of the espresso. It was absolutely perfect. And he knew, with the kind of primal instinct that had kept him alive in the criminal underworld for a decade, that Harper Caroline was by far the most dangerous individual in that entire room. The police showed up 3 minutes later. Flashing blue and red lights painted the wet streets, transforming the scene into a dizzying light show. Detective Miller, a veteran of the Chicago Police Department with a weary mustache and a fresh coffee stain on his tie, took command of the situation. Statements were collected. People were emotional and unreliable. The businessman who had knocked over the wine now insisted the robbers were carrying machine guns. The manager swore they had stolen over $1 million. But when Detective Miller sat down to interview Harper, He found himself becoming deeply frustrated. "Could you walk me through it one more time, Miss Caroline?" Miller said with a sigh, clicking his ballpoint pen. "Three men, all Caucasian, approximately 5'10", 6 foot, and 5'8", Harper recited without emotion. She was perched on a crate in the alley behind the restaurant, smoking a cigarette with perfectly steady hands. The leader had a noticeable twitch in his left eye. It suggests methamphetamine withdrawal. The weapon was a Colt 1911, but the safety mechanism was engaged the entire time. He had no idea how to operate it. Miller stopped writing. He looked at her, truly looked at her for the first time. "You could see that the safety was on?" "It is a very distinct lever," she said with a shrug. "It is difficult to miss when it is being pressed into your cheek." "Do you have a background in the military? Law enforcement?" "I was a librarian before I took this job," she lied. The falsehood rolled off her tongue as smoothly as the smoke she was exhaling. "I enjoy reading books about firearms." Miller did not believe a single word of it, but he had no grounds to hold her. She was a victim, a strangely composed victim, but still a victim. Back inside the restaurant, Lorenzo Moretti was also, technically, a victim. However, the police officers treated him with the careful respect they always showed to powerful figures in the mob. He formally declined to provide an official statement. His legal team was already managing any potential issues. As Lorenzo was being led to his armored sport utility vehicle, he placed a call. "Marcus," Lorenzo said into his phone, "I need a full background check. This is your top priority." "What is the name?" Marcus, his most trusted advisor and information specialist, asked from the other end. "Harper Caroline. She is an employee at the Gilded Fork. I need to know where she lives, where she came from, and who she truly is." "I am on it, boss. Did the deal go bad?" "The deal never happened," Lorenzo replied, "but something far more interesting occurred." He ended the call. As his vehicle pulled away from the curb, he watched Harper through the heavily tinted window. She was walking home through the pouring rain, having just refused an umbrella offered by a paramedic. She appeared small, almost fragile, but he had already seen the tiger hiding beneath the lamb's skin. By the following morning, her world had been turned upside down. The security camera footage had been leaked. An employee at the security firm, looking to make some fast money from a tabloid website, had sold the digital tape. By 9 o'clock in the morning, the video, now titled "Waitress Ignores Gunman to Make Coffee," had accumulated 4 million views. The internet erupted. One user commented, "She did not even blink. Is she some kind of android?" Another wrote, "That is not courage, that is complete dissociation. She has definitely seen some terrible things." A third posted, "She is officially the calmest person in 2019, an absolute legend." But inside a luxurious penthouse with a view of Lake Michigan, Lorenzo Moretti was not scrolling through comments. He was carefully reading a file that Marcus had just delivered to his desk. "It is thin, Lorenzo," Marcus said, pacing anxiously around the room. "It is too thin." Harper Caroline, supposedly born in Ohio, her social security number was issued only 3 years ago. There is no credit history before 2016, no high school pictures, no listed family members. "It is a ghost profile," Lorenzo said, tapping a finger on the document. "A well-constructed one, but it falls apart under real investigation." "If she is a federal agent, she is the finest actor I have ever witnessed," Marcus said. "Federal agents do not allow a loaded gun to get that close to their head without even flinching. What we saw, that was something else entirely." "She is not a federal agent," Lorenzo stated, rising from his chair to pace toward the window. A Fed would have played the hero, tried to talk him down. She displayed zero concern. Her contempt for the gunman was absolute, as if he were nothing more than an insect. So who is she, really? A member of a rival family? Perhaps a professional killer living off the grid? We will discover the truth. Lorenzo pivoted to face Marcus. That video is exploding online. If she was trying to stay hidden, her entire world has just been incinerated. Anyone looking for her will see her face splashed across every news channel before midday. She is a liability, a loose end, Marcus cautioned. No, Lorenzo corrected, a faint, chilling smile touching his lips. She is an opportunity. Find her and bring her to me. Meanwhile, inside a worn-down studio apartment in South Chicago, Harper was in motion. This was not the chaotic packing of a panicked woman. This was the methodical packing of a professional. She filled a single bag with stacks of cash, 3 different passports, and a Glock 26 she retrieved from its taped hiding place beneath the kitchen sink. A fresh set of clothes completed the kit. She had already seen the news reports. Her face was plastered everywhere. The identity of Harper Caroline was now compromised. Stupid, she muttered under her breath, securing the pistol in the holster at the small of her back. You became complacent. You should have just screamed like everyone else. She had invested 3 long years constructing this quiet existence, 3 years of absolute silence, 3 years spent cleaning toilets and carrying plates of pasta, all in an effort to wash away the memory of the blood that once stained her hands. Now, it was all gone. It had unraveled simply because she could not summon fear for a desperate man holding a rusted firearm. It was finished. She took hold of her duffel bag and pulled open the apartment door. 2 men in expensive suits stood waiting in the corridor. They were not police officers. More importantly, they were not the people she had been running from. Those people would have simply opened fire through the door without knocking. These men were different. They wore the Moretti family crest on their lapel pins. Ms. Caroline, the bigger of the 2 spoke. Mr. Moretti requests a moment of your time. The muscles in Harper's hand contracted, her fingers twitching just a fraction of an inch toward the weapon at her back. In a split second, she assessed the situation. 2 hostiles, confined space, close range. She could eliminate them both before their hands even cleared their jackets. But that action would ignite a war with the formidable Moretti family, and her list of enemies was already far too long. She consciously let the tension drain from her shoulders, slipping back into the persona of the frightened waitress, even as she felt the facade beginning to crack. Am I in some kind of trouble? She asked, allowing a slight tremor into her voice. That depends entirely on your answer, the man responded calmly. Harper considered her options. If she made a run for it, she would be hunted by all sides. If she went willingly with Moretti's men, she was stepping directly into the lion's den. But lions, she knew, could be understood. The phantoms from her past were a different kind of monster. All right, she said, her voice barely a whisper. Let me just grab my coat. She moved back into the apartment, but she did not reach for a coat. Instead, she performed a silent, reflexive check of her pistol's chamber, took a single, steadying breath, and then walked back out to face the men who were about to deliver her to the devil himself. The car ride proceeded in complete silence. They drove her to the Spire, the towering headquarters of the Moretti operation, cleverly disguised as a high-end luxury hotel. Her escorts guided her past the opulent lobby, using a private elevator that ascended directly to the penthouse suite. As the doors slid open, Lorenzo was there, waiting. He was seated in a massive leather armchair, with the entire glittering Chicago skyline serving as his backdrop. He made no move to stand. Harper Caroline, Lorenzo said, as if tasting the name, or whatever name you actually go by. Harper let her bag fall to the floor. In that moment, she let the entire act dissolve. She stood up straight, her posture transforming from the weary slump of a service worker to the disciplined, rigid grace of a trained soldier. What is it you want, Moretti? The question was direct and cold. A spark of interest ignited in Lorenzo's eyes. He clearly preferred this version of her. I am facing a problem, Lorenzo explained, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. I have a shipment arriving in 1 week. It is incredibly valuable and extremely sensitive. I require someone to supervise the transaction, someone who does not fall apart when a gun is pointed at them. Someone who has the presence of mind to notice the safety is still on. I pour coffee for a living, she stated flatly. You are a terrible liar, Lorenzo countered without missing a beat. And at this moment, you are a liar who has 4 million views on YouTube. My contacts inform me that certain people in Naples are taking a great interest in that particular video. It appears they think they recognize you. A chill went through Harper. Naples. He knew. I can offer you protection, Lorenzo said, leaning forward in his chair. I can erase you from the internet, bury all copies of that footage, and provide you with a new identity. A genuine one this time. And what is the price for all this? She asked. You come to work for me. Harper studied him. He possessed a sharp, cruel kind of attractiveness, but she was not seeing a man. She was seeing a shield. If I agree to work for you, Harper said, her voice sinking to a whisper that still carried across the vast room, people are going to die. Lorenzo's mouth curved into a smile. I am certainly counting on it. The quiet in the penthouse was thick and heavy, the type of stillness that often comes right before the sound of a gunshot. Outside, rain hammered against the enormous floor-to-ceiling windows, smearing the lights of Chicago into abstract streaks of gold and deep blood red. Harper Caroline remained motionless in the middle of the room, her inexpensive duffel bag resting by her feet. She had not shifted since Lorenzo Moretti made his proposition. Her thoughts were a whirlwind, calculating every scenario and every possible result. You are scanning the room again, Lorenzo noted. He walked over to a crystal decanter that sat on a sidebar. His movements were smooth, like a predator's. You have glanced at the balcony door 3 separate times. You are trying to determine if the glass is bulletproof. It is. It is laminated polycarbonate, Harper corrected him, her voice quiet but firm. That is standard for high-risk individuals. However, the frame is made of aluminum. If I were to shoot the hinges, the entire pane of glass would fall out. It is not a wall, Mr. Moretti. It is just a very heavy curtain. Lorenzo froze, the amber whiskey in his glass swirling as he paused mid-pour. He turned around slowly, a look of authentic fascination replacing his usual mask of bored indifference. Who was it that taught you that? My father taught me, she answered. The lie felt more natural this time, even though it was wrapped around a piece of truth she had not spoken aloud in many years. He was a structural engineer. A structural engineer who instructed his daughter on how to breach the security of a reinforced penthouse apartment, Lorenzo mused. He closed the distance between them, holding out the glass of whiskey. Drink this. You look like you're about to vibrate right out of your own skin. Harper accepted the glass but did not take a sip. She held it as if it were a weapon. I do not drink when I am on the job. You have not agreed to the job, he pointed out. I do not exactly have a choice, do I? Harper's eyes narrowed. You mentioned Naples. You said they know who I am. Lorenzo perched on the edge of his massive mahogany desk, casually crossing one ankle over the other. My associates in Italy forwarded me a screenshot of the video this morning. The Camorra has a very long memory for faces, Harper. Or would you prefer I call you Alicia? The name struck her with the force of a physical impact. Harper's grip on the whiskey glass tightened until her knuckles were bone white. Alicia. She had not been called that name in 4 years. Not since the night of the car explosion. Not since she had frantically scrubbed her father's blood from her hands in the restroom of a gas station in Lyon and transformed into Harper Caroline. Alicia Rossi, Lorenzo continued, his voice dropping into a smooth, menacing baritone. The daughter of Marco Rossi, who was the Camorra's most trusted accountant. The same man who managed over 3 billion euros in drug money before he disappeared with 50 million of it. He did not just vanish, Harper said, her voice shaking with a deep fury she fought to contain. They murdered him. They burned him alive inside his own car. But they never located the money, Lorenzo countered smoothly. And they never located his daughter. Not until yesterday, when she made the decision to become an internet celebrity over a simple cup of coffee. Harper placed the glass on a nearby table with a sharp, definitive clink. She reached for the small of her back. The two bodyguards positioned by the elevator instantly tensed, their hands dropping to their firearms. But Lorenzo simply raised a hand, signaling for them to stand down. Harper did not draw a weapon. She pulled out a simple hair tie. She swept her long, dark hair back from her face and secured it, revealing the sharp, determined line of her jaw. The movement also exposed a long, jagged scar that ran from just below her ear down to her collarbone. It was a permanent reminder of the explosion that had taken her father's life. "My father did not steal that money," she declared, her voice now completely changed. The timid waitress was gone forever. In her place stood a woman who was raised in the shadow of Mount Vesuvius, a woman who was counting stacks of cash before she even knew how to read. He was trying to use it as leverage to get us out of that life. They discovered his plan, and they executed him. "I killed the two men they sent to find me. I took whatever cash I could find in the safe, and I ran." Lorenzo observed her, truly seeing her for the first time. He understood now, the posture, the cold, tactical mind. She was not a soldier. She was exiled royalty, a Mafia princess who had been forged into a warrior by the need to survive. "If the Camorra knows that I am here," Harper stated, "they will dispatch a professional team to eliminate me, not local thugs. They will send specialists. If I remain with you, I will bring a war directly to you." "I am already engaged in a war," Lorenzo replied with a dismissive wave. "The Russian upstart is encroaching on my northern territories. The local street gangs are becoming bold, just like those fools in the coffee shop. I need a strategic advantage. You have a gift for this world, Elysia. I recognized it in the video. You possess the ice." The ice? It was the term for complete emotional detachment when facing death. It was a quality that could never be taught. Lorenzo stood and walked until he was standing only inches away from her. He smelled of expensive cologne, mixed with the faint scent of gunpowder. "I am offering you a trade. You assist me in resolving my current issues, beginning with my shipment next week, and in return, I will deploy the full power and influence of the Moretti family to protect you from Naples. I will make you a ghost once more." Harper looked up, meeting his dark, intense, and commanding gaze. For the first time in many years, she experienced a sensation other than constant fear. She felt seen. "I have conditions," she stated clearly. "Name them." "I will not carry a firearm that I have not personally cleaned and inspected. I will not sleep in any room that has only one way out. And if you ever lay a hand on me without my express permission, I will slit your throat in your sleep." A genuine smile spread across Lorenzo's face. It was a sharp and terrifying sight. "Deal," he said. "Welcome to the family, Harper. We should keep that name for now. It is much safer." The initial phase of preparation was agonizingly slow. Lorenzo was not a man who believed in rushing things. He was the type of man who meticulously suffocated his opponents with overwhelming detail. For the following 3 days, Harper was quartered in a secure suite inside the spire. She was not exactly a prisoner, but she was certainly not free. She dedicated her hours to studying the detailed dossier that Marcus, the family's consigliere, had brought to her. The incoming shipment was not drugs, as she might have expected. It was diamonds. They were uncut and certified conflict-free, arriving from a broker in Sierra Leone. The plan was to launder them through the Moretti family's legitimate jewelry businesses. The exchange was scheduled for Friday evening at the Port of Chicago Terminal 4. Harper sat at a massive glass table, which was covered in blueprints of the entire shipping terminal. Marcus stood a short distance away, watching her intently. Doubt filled his voice. "This location is all wrong," Harper murmured, her red marker drawing a slow line across the blueprint. "It is a standard setup," Marcus insisted. "We have the union workers at Terminal 4 under our control. The place is secure." "It is a funnel," Harper stated without looking up from the plans. "Just look at the container stacks. They form a single, narrow path for any vehicle coming in. If the seller decides to ambush you, all he needs is one crane to block this intersection. You would be trapped inside a kill box. Tell me, who picked this location? The broker did. Solomon Vane. Harper's hand froze. She lifted her head and stared directly at Marcus. Solomon Vane is not a broker. He is a mercenary for hire. My father used his services once for a dangerous transport job in Marls. Vane serves whoever pays the most. If he chose this meeting spot, it is because he is selling you out. Marcus's face tightened into a frown. We have conducted business with that man for 5 years. People change, Harper said, her tone turning to ice. I suggest you check his financial accounts. Search for a significant deposit from the Vulov family made within the last 48 hours. Marcus paused for a moment, then grabbed his tablet. His fingers moved frantically across the screen for several minutes. All the color drained from his face. There is an offshore transfer, Marcus whispered, his voice trembling. It came from the Cayman Islands. $2 million. The transfer cleared yesterday. The entire room fell into a heavy silence. Harper leaned back in her chair, casually spinning the red marker between her fingers. She had been working for them for less than 48 hours, and she had already saved Lorenzo's life. When Lorenzo walked into the room 10 minutes later, after a panicked briefing from Marcus, he saw Harper in a new light. The curiosity in his eyes was gone. In its place was a deep, undeniable respect. You were correct, Lorenzo said, his voice low. Vane arranged a trap for us. The Russians are positioned at Terminal 4, waiting. So we call it off, Marcus proposed quickly. No, Lorenzo answered, his voice firm and unyielding. We do not cancel. We never project weakness. If we fail to appear, Vulov will believe we are running scared. We are going. That is a suicide mission, Marcus protested. It is only suicide if we play by their rules, Lorenzo countered, turning his attention fully to Harper. You discovered their trap. Now, I want you to tell me how we use it against them. Harper rose from her chair and walked back to the blueprint on the table. She felt a familiar rush of adrenaline course through her veins. This part of the world, the meticulous planning, the strategic thinking, this lethal dance, was encoded in her very being. She had tried to bury it beneath a life of coffee service and elegant decorations, but it was an unbreakable part of her. We will not use the main gate, Harper explained, her finger tracing a new route along the edge of the water. We will approach by boat, using small, quiet zodiacs. We will place a team on top of these cranes well before the scheduled meeting. When Vane and the Russians launch their attack, our men will unleash hell from above. We will transform their kill box into our own. Lorenzo watched her, completely captivated. She was undoubtedly beautiful, but in this moment, as she discussed fields of fire and tactical entry points, she was nothing short of magnificent. And what about me? Lorenzo asked. Where will I be in this plan? You will be the bait, Harper replied, locking her gaze with his. You will have to place your complete trust in me. I trust you, Lorenzo affirmed, and the significance of those words settled heavily in the air. On Friday night, the port of Chicago was a desolate landscape of corroding steel and ocean mist. A thick, cold fog drifted in from Lake Michigan. It concealed the massive, looming stacks of shipping containers. Harper was outfitted in full tactical gear she had sourced from Moretti's private armory, complete with black cargo pants, a form-fitting Kevlar vest, and a communications earpiece. She was not on the boat. She was on the ground, disguised as one of Lorenzo's ordinary bodyguards. Her hair was hidden beneath a beanie, and a high collar shielded her face from view. She had insisted on staying close to the principal objective, close to Lorenzo. He stood waiting in an open space between two towering rows of containers. He wore a long wool coat, ensuring his hands were always visible. Behind him, two of his cars sat with their engines running. In front of him stood Solomon Vane, clutching a briefcase. Lorenzo, Vane said with a wide smile, his teeth looking yellow under the harsh floodlights. You are right on time. I prefer to conduct business efficiently. Lorenzo answered with perfect calm. Do you have the diamonds? But of course. Harper was methodically scanning the perimeter. She paid no attention to their conversation. Instead, she was studying the deep shadows. She was observing the tops of the containers where her own snipers were now positioned. Check your 6 o'clock, she whispered into the microphone on her lapel. East side, third container from the end. I see a reflection. Lorenzo gave no outward sign, but he subtly shifted his stance. Without warning, the floodlights went out, plunging the entire area into absolute darkness. Now, Harper screamed into her comms. A single gunshot echoed through the night, but it did not come from Vane. It came from the shadows. A bullet ricocheted off the pavement, missing Lorenzo's foot by mere inches. It is an ambush, Vane shouted, diving toward the ground in a rehearsed performance. Suddenly, a new set of floodlights from the Russian position blazed to life, blinding Lorenzo's men. Figures armed with automatic rifles began pouring out from behind the containers on the north side of the yard. It was the beginning of a slaughter. But Harper had planned for this. Take out their lights, she commanded. Her sniper on the crane immediately shot out the Russian floodlights. The yard was once again consumed by darkness. Engage, Lorenzo commanded, pulling his own firearm. Complete chaos erupted. Moretti's men, all equipped with the night vision goggles Harper had demanded, began to open fire. The Russians, now blind and disoriented, were firing wildly into the shadows. Harper was already moving. She did not retreat. She ran directly toward Lorenzo. He was taking cover behind a forklift, firing back at the enemy. We need to move, she yelled above the deafening noise of the battle, grabbing his arm. They have a heavy machine gunner positioned on that ridge. How can you be sure? I can hear the sound of the belt feed. She pulled him down low, guiding him through the labyrinth of metal, with a deep, instinctive understanding of the layout she had memorized. A stream of bullets ripped through the ground exactly where they had been standing just seconds before. They finally reached a narrow opening between two large containers. Harper forcefully pushed Lorenzo into the tight space, pressing her own body against his as a shield. They stood chest to chest, their breathing heavy and ragged, while the sounds of battle raged just a few feet away. For a brief moment, it felt as though time had stopped. Lorenzo looked down at her. Her eyes were wide and focused, scanning the darkness just over his shoulder. She was utterly fierce. You are very good at this, he whispered, his voice hoarse with adrenaline. Save your compliments for later, she snapped back, quickly checking the magazine in her pistol. We are not safe yet. Vane is getting away. He has the diamonds and your cash. Let him run. We survived the attack. No, Harper declared firmly. We never let traitors escape. That is a lesson my father taught me. She pulled away from him and sprinted out into the open, heading for the water's edge where Vane was desperately trying to get into a waiting speedboat. Harper, no! Lorenzo shouted after her. She paid him no mind. She dropped to one knee on the slick, wet concrete, raised her pistol with a steady hand, and took a deep breath. The boat was 50 yards out, rising and falling on the turbulent water. Vane was fumbling with the mooring rope. She did not aim for the man. She aimed for the engine. Bang, bang. She fired 2 rounds. The outboard motor gave off a shower of sparks and then died completely. Vane let out a scream of pure frustration, yanking uselessly on the starter cord. Harper calmly stood up, the pistol still smoking by her side. Within seconds, Lorenzo's men had the disabled boat completely surrounded. Lorenzo came up to stand just behind her. The sounds of the firefight were finally fading. The Russians were either dead or in full retreat. He glanced at the powerless boat, then looked back at Harper. She turned to face him, the rain soaking her hair and pasting it to her face. She looked utterly exhausted, but she was alive, and she had won. You missed him, Lorenzo observed, raising an eyebrow. I needed him alive, Harper responded, holstering her weapon as she spoke. He is the one who knows who hired him. He knows where the Vulovs are hiding. Lorenzo reached out, gently brushing a wet piece of hair away from her cheek. His hand lingered for a moment on her jaw. It was a deeply intimate gesture, both possessive and surprisingly tender. "You are a dangerous woman, Harper," he murmured. "I tried to tell you," she whispered back. Her heart was pounding against her ribs, not from the exertion of the fight, but from the simple electricity of his touch. "I am not a waitress." Lorenzo's thumb lightly grazed her lower lip. "No," he said. "You are the queen." The raw adrenaline from the docks had long since dissipated, replaced by the sterile, fluorescent hum of the basement located beneath the spire. This was the place where the Moretti family conducted business that could never be discussed over a cup of espresso. Solomon Vane was secured with zip ties to a steel chair positioned in the middle of the concrete floor. His expensive suit was completely ruined, smeared with grease and stained with his own blood. His lip was split open, a parting gift delivered by Marcus during the car ride. Lorenzo paced around the edge of the room like a caged panther. He had taken off his coat and rolled up his shirt sleeves, showing off forearms covered in muscle and intricate tattoos. He was seething with rage, not only because of the betrayal, but because of the incredible risk Harper had been forced to take. "He is not talking," Marcus reported, wiping his knuckles on a clean rag. "He claims he just accepted a contract. He says he has no idea who the middleman was." "He knows," Lorenzo growled. He walked over to a workbench and picked up a heavy wrench. "He just believes that his silence is worth more than his kneecaps." "Stop," Harper said from the doorway. She had been leaning against the heavy metal door, still wearing her tactical gear, her face smudged with soot from the fight. She pushed herself off the wall and stepped into the circle of light. "You are about to break him," Harper said, her voice steady. "And if you break him, he will be useless for verifying the arms shipment." "I do not give a damn about bank transfers right now," Lorenzo snapped. "I want the name of his Russian contact." "It was not the Russians who set this up," Harper stated. She walked directly up to Vane, stopping just inches from his face. She did not raise her voice. She did not make any threats. She simply looked at him with that unnervingly blank expression. It was the same look she had as a waitress while a gun was pointed at her. "Solomon," she began softly, "you keep checking your watch every 30 seconds. You are not looking for a rescue team to arrive. You are waiting for a wire transfer to be completed." Vane blinked rapidly. A single drop of sweat traced a path down his temple. "I have no idea what you are talking about." "You received half the payment up front," Harper continued, her voice a flat, analytical drone. "The final half is released upon confirmation that Lorenzo is dead. That is the reason you are staying silent. You believe that if you can stall for long enough, word of the shootout will get out. Your client will assume Lorenzo is dead, and the rest of the money will be deposited into your offshore account. Only then will you talk." Vane's eyes grew wide with terror. She had just laid out his entire desperate strategy in a matter of seconds. Harper leaned in even closer, her voice dropping to a barely audible whisper. "But I already checked the news for you, Solomon. We are in control of the story. The report that is airing on Channel 5 at this very moment. This was never about a mob war. The official story would be a gas leak, a catastrophic explosion down at the docks. No remains were ever recovered. Your clients are convinced you have failed them. They have no intention of paying." Vane's entire body sagged into the chair, the fight pouring out of him like sand. The simple, brutal logic of his failure crushed him more completely than any physical blow could have. "It wasn't Vulov," Vane whispered, his voice a dry rasp. "Who was it?" Lorenzo asked, stepping forward so his large shadow completely engulfed the broken man. "A man from Zurich," Vane choked out. He never offered a name, but he confirmed the payment using an old Camorra signal. He was very specific about the woman. His instructions were to eliminate Moretti, but to capture the girl and bring her back alive. Harper's spine went ramrod straight. Capture the girl alive. "Zurich," she breathed, the word a ghost on her lips as all the color vanished from her face. Lorenzo caught the subtle, terrifying shift in her demeanor instantly. He gave a sharp nod to Marcus. "Get him out of my sight. Put him in one of the holding cells." As Marcus hauled the whimpering, defeated broker from the room, Lorenzo's attention fixed entirely on Harper. The basement was suddenly, unnervingly silent. Harper. What is in Zurich? She instinctively wrapped her arms around her waist, a defensive posture he had never witnessed from her before. "My father's emergency accounts," she said. "The ones he promised me were completely empty." "You believe he could be alive?" Lorenzo pressed, taking a careful step toward her. "I saw the body," she insisted, her voice trembling with a memory she couldn't escape. "It was burned so badly it was unrecognizable. But the car was his. The watch on the wrist was his. I was the one who buried him." "If he is truly dead," Lorenzo reasoned, moving closer and gently taking her trembling hands in his, "then it means someone else has access to his codes. It means someone wants you delivered back to Italy, and they are using the Russians to handle the unpleasant details." He gently pulled her toward him. The tactical vest she wore was a hard, cold barrier between them, yet the warmth radiating from his body was powerful and undeniable. He looked down at her, and for the first time, he did not see the formidable strategist, but the vulnerable woman beneath all that armor. "You are shaking," he observed softly. "I am furious," she corrected, her chin lifting as she met his gaze. Her eyes were shimmering with unshed tears, but her stare was ferocious. "I mourned him for 4 entire years. I have spent 4 years on the run, cleaning up the mess his mistakes created. If some phantom is using his name to manipulate me, to hunt me, then we will hunt the phantom and kill it," Lorenzo vowed, finishing her thought. He lifted one hand, his calloused thumb brushing away a smudge of soot from her cheek, erasing the grime of the fight. His touch was like an electric current, and Harper's breath caught in her throat. For one fleeting second in that dark, damp basement, the walls between them completely disappeared. There was nothing but the undeniable force pulling them together. "You need to get some rest," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a husky murmur. "The mayor's charity ball is tomorrow." Harper pulled back, the spell broken, her expression clouded with confusion. "We are attending a party?" "No, we are making a public declaration," Lorenzo clarified, his expression hardening into one of cold resolve. "The entire city believes we suffered a major loss at the docks. The Russians believe we are wounded and weak. So we are going to walk directly into the most significant social event of the year, right through the front door. I need them to see us. More importantly, I need them to see you." "Me?" she asked. "I am just your employee." "Not anymore," Lorenzo stated flatly. "Tomorrow evening, you will not be my bodyguard. You will be my date." The grand ballroom of the Palmer House Hotel was an overwhelming spectacle of expensive tuxedos and breathtaking designer gowns. A professional string quartet played Mozart, their music a delicate layer over the constant buzz of hushed gossip and the chime of champagne glasses. Every person of consequence in Chicago was in attendance. There were politicians, powerful judges, union bosses, and the gangsters who secretly controlled all of them. At the very top of the sweeping marble staircase, Lorenzo Moretti materialized. He was dressed in a tuxedo of midnight blue, tailored so perfectly it seemed to be a part of him. He looked exactly like what he was, the undisputed king of Chicago's underworld. But the vast, noisy room did not fall silent for him. It fell silent for the woman who stood beside him. Harper Caroline was wearing a gown of pure crimson silk, a bold, almost violent statement in a room dominated by black and white. The dress was daringly backless, intentionally revealing the pale, jagged outline of a scar on her shoulder blade. She wore absolutely no jewelry, no glittering diamonds to soften her edge. Her dark hair was unbound, falling in a cascade of thick waves over her shoulders. She radiated an aura of danger. She looked like a queen. "Just breathe," Lorenzo whispered so only she could hear as they began their descent. Every single eye in this place is fixed on you. I am aware, Harper replied, her voice low, a perfectly practiced smile locked on her face. In my head, I am counting all the exits. There are 4 main doors. 2 service elevators are located behind the bar. I would expect snipers positioned on the mezzanine level. Stop working, Lorenzo murmured, his fingers tightening on her hand where it rested on his arm. For just 5 minutes, I need you to just be here with me. They navigated the dense crowd like predators moving through a coral reef. People instinctively stepped aside, clearing a path for them. Lorenzo introduced her to everyone as simply Harper, providing no surname, no context for who she was or why the city's most sought-after bachelor had arrived with a former waitress at the gala of the year. Still, the whispers trailed them like a shadow. Is that the woman from the surveillance video? The Ice Queen. They arrived at the center of the vast dance floor, just as the orchestra swelled into a classic waltz. Lorenzo smoothly turned her to face him, his hand resting firmly on the small of her back. I do not dance, Harper said, her body stiff with resistance as he began to lead her. You do everything else with absolute perfection, Lorenzo countered, his gaze locking with hers. I have a strong suspicion that you do this perfectly as well. He was, of course, correct. Her body held the memory of lessons from her youth, the endless etiquette classes her father had funded with money earned from violence and crime. She moved with an innate grace, the brilliant red of her dress swirling around his dark, powerful legs. You look exquisite, Alicia, he whispered, using her true name in public for the very first time, his voice so low that only she could hear the forbidden word. Do not call me that, she warned, even as her fingers tightened on his shoulder. Alicia is gone. She is not gone to me. For a single, suspended moment, the entire world seemed to shrink until it contained only the 2 of them. Lorenzo spun her gracefully, and for the first time in so many years, Harper felt completely safe. She felt truly seen. She realized with a sudden, sharp jolt of panic that she was falling in love with the very monster who had hired her to protect him. And then the music did not end, it was violently cut short. This happened because the main doors to the ballroom were slammed open with an explosive bang. The lively chatter in the room ceased instantly. Framed in the doorway was not a police tactical unit, nor was it a Russian assassination team. It was one man. He was tall and wore a stark white suit that was an aggressive statement in itself. He had slicked back, jet-black hair and a face that was handsome in a chiseled, cruel kind of way. He was flanked by 4 men who did not have the look of Chicago street muscle. They looked like Roman statues brought to life, complete with discreet earpieces. Harper froze completely within Lorenzo's embrace. Her blood felt as if it had turned to ice water in her veins. Who is that? Lorenzo demanded, feeling the sudden, rigid tension in her body. Dante, Harper breathed, her voice so faint it was nearly soundless. Dante Romano, from the Camorra, my fiancé, she whispered, the words tumbling out. The man I was scheduled to marry the very week that I died. Dante Romano strode into the ballroom with the absolute self-assurance of a man who believed he owned the very air everyone else was breathing. He paid no mind to the audible gasps from the guests. He completely ignored the frantic movements of the venue's security. He walked in a straight, unwavering line toward the center of the dance floor, his cold eyes fixed exclusively on Harper. Lorenzo moved to stand directly in front of Harper, shielding her with his body as his right hand slipped inside his jacket, finding the comforting grip of his pistol. You are a very long way from Naples, my friend, Lorenzo said, his voice clear and carrying across the now silent room. Dante came to a halt 5 feet away. A smile touched his lips, but it held no warmth and did not reach his eyes. And you, Mr. Moretti, are currently holding something that is my property. Harper is not an object, Lorenzo countered, his entire body coiled and ready for violence. And she is with me. Dante let out a short, dry laugh that was entirely devoid of humor. He looked over Lorenzo's shoulder, his gaze pinning Harper where she stood. Harper, Dante said with open mockery. Is that the name you are using for yourself these days? My love, after you abandoned me at the altar, after you forced our families to bury an empty casket. Harper finally stepped out from behind the shield of Lorenzo's body. She knew she had to face this herself. Go home, Dante. There is nothing left for you in this city. I cannot return home without what I came for, Dante replied, reaching slowly into his inner jacket pocket. Half a dozen of Lorenzo's bodyguards tensed, their hands moving toward their own weapons. But Dante was not reaching for a weapon. He produced a single, neatly folded piece of paper. I am carrying a message from a mutual acquaintance of ours in Zurich. He held the paper out toward her. Harper stood frozen for a moment, then she took it. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably as she unfolded the heavy note. The message was handwritten. She knew that penmanship intimately. She had seen it on every birthday card and school report for 20 years of her life. Alicia, my dear, come home. The accounts will remain frozen until we are reunited. I miss you. Your papa. The entire world seemed to tilt violently on its axis. The solid marble floor felt as if it was dissolving right from under her feet. He is alive, she whispered, the horrifying truth strangling the air in her lungs. He is actually alive. Of course he is alive, Dante confirmed smoothly, taking a step closer and completely ignoring the lethal threat that was Lorenzo. Marco never died. He orchestrated the car bombing himself to eliminate the assassins that had been sent for him. He sacrificed your entire identity just to protect his own life. For the last 4 years, he has been living in absolute luxury, just waiting for things to cool down. But now, he finds he needs his daughter. Or, to be more precise, he needs your retinal scan to gain access to the final $10 million. Harper looked up, tears finally breaking free and streaming down her face. But they were not tears of sadness. They were tears of pure, undiluted betrayal. Her father had not died trying to protect her. He had allowed her to believe she was a devastated, hunted orphan. He had let her struggle in poverty and live in constant fear, all so he could eventually use her like a simple key for a bank vault. He sold you, Alicia, Dante said, his voice soft as he extended a hand to her. Come with me. We will journey to Zurich together. We will secure the money, and after that, we can finally be a family again, just as we planned. Lorenzo watched Harper, and he could see the utter devastation shattering her from the inside out. He knew with cold certainty that if she left with Dante, she would be dead the very instant that safe was opened. Do not touch her, Lorenzo warned, once again moving to stand between them. This time, his gun was in his hand. A wave of gasps and a few short screams erupted from the terrified guests. Put your weapon away, Moretti, Dante sneered. This is a matter of family. This is Camorra business. She is not Camorra, Lorenzo snarled, and the click of the gun's safety being disengaged was a deafening sound in the profound silence. She is Moretti. Dante's condescending smile finally vanished from his face. Is that meant to be a declaration of war? No, Lorenzo answered, his eyes burning with a protective fire that was so intense it even shocked Harper. Consider it an eviction notice. You need to get out of my city. If you are not on an airplane within 1 hour, the only way you will be leaving Chicago is inside of a body bag. Dante's gaze flickered from Lorenzo to the growing circle of Moretti soldiers who were now closing in along the ballroom's perimeter. He quickly understood that he was severely outgunned. Very well, Dante conceded, taking a moment to smoothly adjust the cuffs of his suit jacket. He looked at Harper one final time. This is not finished, Alicia. Your father is a very impatient man, and you, more than anyone, know what happens when Marco grows impatient. With that final threat, Dante turned and walked away, his 4 men immediately forming a protective diamond formation around him. The ballroom remained completely, deathly silent. Every single guest was staring at the 3 people left standing in the center of the floor. Harper stood there, paralyzed, the crumpled note still clenched tightly in her fist. Her entire existence had been built upon a terrible lie. Her own father was the monster in her story. She felt her knees begin to buckle, her strength completely gone. She fully expected to feel the cold, hard impact of the marble floor. Instead, she collapsed directly into Lorenzo's strong arms. The secure vault, buried deep within a bunker in Zurich, was significantly colder than the snow-covered streets above. The walls inside were covered in brushed steel, and the atmosphere was thick with the scent of ozone and immense wealth. Harper was standing in front of the massive circular steel door, feeling her heart hammer against her ribcage like a frantic, trapped bird. But her expression remained a mask of pure, cold ice. Standing just behind her was Lorenzo, his hand resting in a relaxed posture near the firearm concealed beneath his long trench coat. On the other side of the room, flanked by Dante and his imposing men, an old man sat in a wheelchair. He seemed fragile, almost pathetic. But Harper saw the truth. Marco Rossi was a snake who had merely shed his old skin. Alicia! Marco's smile was a grotesque thing, his eyes shining with a poisonous blend of ownership and greed. My beautiful girl, you are the image of your mother. Do not say her name, Harper commanded, her words slicing through the tense air like a blade. You let me think you were dead. You let me nearly starve on the streets of Chicago while you were hiding millions in the Cayman Islands. I did all of it for our future, Marco rasped, rolling his wheelchair closer to her. The danger needed to pass. Now, we just need your eye for the retinal scan, and we can access the master account. We can finally disappear. Only you and me, my dear. And me, Dante cut in, taking a step forward. His gun was out, though pointed toward the floor for now. Do not forget who arranged this little family reunion. Lorenzo moved immediately, positioning his body to shield Harper. The only thing you are arranging, Dante, is your own funeral. Stop, Harper ordered, her voice firm. She looked at Lorenzo, her eyes conveying a silent message. I need to do this. She then walked toward the retinal scanner. The advanced machine hummed loudly. A sharp green laser carefully mapped the unique patterns of her eye. Identity confirmed. Alicia Rossi, a calm, automated voice declared. Deep inside the vault, heavy locks began to click open one by one. Marco leaned forward in his chair, pure greed distorting his face. Dante's grin widened as he raised his pistol to aim at Lorenzo, prepared to eliminate his rival as soon as the fortune was theirs. Accessing accounts, the voice continued. Transfer of funds initiated. Yes, Marco hissed with triumph. Send it all to the Cayman account. Negative, the machine responded. All funds have been transferred to the Charitas International Orphanage Fund, Naples Division. Current account balance is 0. The silence that fell over the room was absolute and crushing. What have you done? Marco whispered, his face turning a dark shade of purple with rage. I simply changed the routing number, Harper said calmly, turning to look at them. You wanted my eyes, Papa. You have them, but you will never touch this money. You stole it from the people of Naples. I have now returned it to them. You stupid girl, Dante roared, lifting his gun to fire. He never completed the action. 2 quiet cracks echoed in the room. Lorenzo had moved with impossible speed. 2 shots from his silenced pistol struck Dante squarely in the chest. The crime boss collapsed onto the expensive Swiss rug, his life gone before he even hit the ground. Marco's bodyguards started to raise their weapons, but the room was suddenly painted with dozens of red laser dots. Lorenzo's highly trained team had already surrounded the building several minutes ago. It is finished, Marco, Lorenzo said, smoothly holstering his weapon without a second glance at Dante's body. The police will be here in 5 minutes. I would suggest you start thinking about what you are going to tell them. Harper took one last look at the man she once called father. He was openly weeping, but not for his daughter or their broken family. He was crying for his lost fortune. In that moment, she felt the final chain to her past shatter. She was finally free. She walked right past him and toward the open door, where the snowy Zurich afternoon was waiting for her. Lorenzo quickly fell into step right beside her. As they stepped outside, the cold air felt sharp and clean. The rush of adrenaline started to wear off, and Harper began to tremble from the ordeal. Lorenzo stopped, gently pulling her toward him and wrapping his heavy, warm coat around her small shoulders. "You just gave away $50 million, Lorenzo murmured, his voice filled with complete awe as he looked down at her. "It was dirty money," Harper whispered, pressing her face against his strong chest. "I never wanted any of it. All I want is a life. A normal one." Lorenzo gently lifted her chin, his thumb brushing softly against her lip. "You can have that life with me. No more hiding, Harper. No more being the Ice Queen. Just the Queen." He then kissed her, a powerful promise of safety and passion in the middle of the gently falling snow. The invisible waitress who always blended into the background was completely gone. In her place stood a powerful woman who had brought down powerful men, fully prepared to claim the new empire she had rightfully won. The legend of the Ice Queen was not born from a viral video of a robbery, but was forged in the shadows where she built her power. Harper Caroline did more than just survive that night in Chicago. She seized that moment to reclaim her entire destiny. She demonstrated that the most lethal weapon is not a pistol or a knife. It is the brilliant mind of a woman who has absolutely nothing left to lose. And in Harper, Lorenzo Moretti discovered more than just a partner. He finally found his true equal. Together, they took control of Chicago, ruling not with violence or fear, but with a terrifying and unbreakable composure. The Waitress was a memory. Long live the Queen. This story is more than just a thrilling tale of danger and romance. It carries a message that every woman needs to hear. Harper spent years being invisible, hiding who she really was, because the world made her believe that staying small was the only way to survive. But when the moment came, she did not run. She stood up, faced every monster from her past, and chose integrity over millions of dollars. The real lesson is this: you do not need anyone's permission to reclaim your life. Your greatest power is not in your fists or your wealth. It is in your mind, your courage, and your refusal to stay silent one day longer. What a story! From a quiet restaurant in Chicago to a high-stakes confrontation deep inside a Swiss vault, Harper's journey proves that the quietest people in the room are often the ones with the most power. So here is my question to you. What would you have done with $50 million? Would you keep it for yourself, or would you give it all away like Harper did? Drop your answer in the comments. I genuinely want to know. If this story gave you chills, or if Harper's strength reminded you of your own, please hit that like button right now. It means more than you know, and it helps this channel reach more people who need stories like this. Subscribe and tap the notification bell so you are always the first to hear our next story. And please, if there is someone in your life who needs a reminder of how strong they truly are, share this video with them today. One story can change the way someone sees themselves. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful lessons and real value to our audience.